How's it going, Joe?
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome, welcome. Can you even believe that this is the 25th unchurched service? That just like blows my mind. God must not be paying attention. He's letting this thing go 25 times already, but no, I'm just kidding. It's amazing. And I really hope that everyone had a good week. Some of us that met in our PTSD support group this week. Tuesday, apparently there was something in the water, or it was a full moon or something, because quite a few of us kind of had some obstacles that we had to jump over or keep from getting run over by. But guess what? We made it and we're here. This is the day that the Lord has made, and we will rejoice and be glad. You know, the music that we were playing, I'm sure that's not everybody's genre, man. But listening to that, it's just like it seeps into your body. And man, I look forward to the day when Jesus comes, when we're up in heaven and some DJ is playing all this music, whether it's harps, trumpets, or what we're listening to now, and we can be on that dance floor saying glory to be to God like that. I can remember back in my days, and when we used to go to the clubs and stuff, and you would get so into the moment. Well, that will be the ultimate getting into the moment. And we're going to get into the moment now as we dive into God's word, and we continue in our teachings in the book of Genesis. And I'm just going to ask our brother Christopher if he would come to the throne and open us up in prayer. Chris, if you would.
Good morning, everybody. Dear Lord, I thank you for all that you do for each and every one of us on a daily basis. You know that we are sinners, and you know that we will repeat sin over and over again, yet you never seem to give up on us. Today, God, I ask you once again, I implore you, please, please help the leaders of the world to stop and to think about these conflicts that are going on right now and the effects that it is having on the rest of the world. May you bless the Pope. May you bless all the leaders who are involved. And may you bless all of us coming together to worship you today. I ask that we learn something from your scripture today. And I ask that you acknowledge everything that people are going through. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And what a fitting words in that prayer. I have not talked to Christopher about what I'm going to be talking about today. Maybe he read ahead and saw what the subject was today. But again, it's just God's timing. We're talking today about war. We're talking about conflict. And one of my favorite things is to help people understand the Bible. So many people have read the Bible for such a long time, and they can memorize it and they know how to get there and they can recite it, but sometimes they just don't understand its practical application. And thank you for giving me that opportunity and honor. So, where we are today, we're in Genesis chapter 14. And today, one of the questions that we're going to ask is, how does God deliver a family? We're going to see a family. They do know the Lord, but man, they get into quite a battle. And so we're getting in to know one of the most famous people in the history of the world. His name is Abraham. His wife's name is Sarah. And what we're going to learn today sort of is how faith works. So either, when you go through life, either you're in a battle or you're receiving a blessing. And these are sort of the two seasons that we're going to see today in Genesis 14. Now, everyone that's here and everyone that's watching, how many of you right now are in a battle? Maybe it's a physical battle, a mental battle, a spiritual battle, an emotional battle, a political battle, governmental battle, global battle. You know, we don't necessarily talk about it, but I mean, okay, and so how many of you, for you, it's your season of blessing? You're like, it's going really well for me. I'm encouraged. I'm hopeful. I'm joyful. You know what? The thing is that the joyful people and the people that aren't so joyful, they just need to hang out together. I mean, that's gonna make things sort of better. And so what we're gonna do right now is ask this: how many of you are like, well, I'm in the middle of it. I've got good and bad going on at the same time. You know what that is? That's the bookends of life. It's battles and it's blessings. And we're going to look at how Abraham and his family navigates both together today. And so we're going to get into this chapter of the Bible. Now, I can almost guarantee with a very high level of certainty that nobody's ever heard anybody preach on this particular portion of the Bible. Why? Well, because it's filled with a bunch of names that nobody knows how to pronounce. Okay. So, again, what I'm going to do, I'm going to say them confidently and quickly, and you're going to pretend that I'm doing a good job and that I know what I'm doing, okay? But words are hard. Some of these words I've come up with a little short form for because I have to say them a couple times. So just sort of bear with me, but that's where we found ourselves, okay? So we're going to jump right in. We're going to look first at the battles. Okay, here we go. Genesis chapter 14, 1 through 16. And again, if you woke up and hope that a middle-aged man butchers ancient names, prayer is answered. It's about to happen. Okay, here we go. Um, in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, and the next guy, I'm just going to call him King Cheddar because I can't say that word and I got to say it a couple times. Okay. So just you see the word, I'm just going to refer to him as King Cheddar. And title, King of Goyim. These kings made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemamber, king of Zeboam, and the king of Belta, that is Zohar. And all these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. Okay. 12 years, that's an important number, so remember that. They had served King Cheddar, but in the 13th year, they rebelled. In the 14th year, King Cheddar and the kings who were with him came and defeated Raphaim, Athreth Karnam, the Izuzum in Ham, the Emin in Sheva Kurtham. I don't know if I said that one right. Nobody really knows. And the Horites in the hill country of Seir. Now, some of you are just like, wow, like these words are just atrocious. Listen, just hang on here, okay? And the Horites in the hill county of Seir, as far as El Paran on the borders of the wilderness, when they turned back and came into En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who were dwelling in Hazaz on Tamar, the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeduim, and the king of Belta, that is Zor, went out and they joined the battle. So we're looking at a war in the valley of Siddim against the king of Cheddar, Tidal, king of Goim, Amraphel, king of Shinar. Now, and sorry, Arioch, the king of Elasar. Four kings and five. Now, the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits. Now, these are tar pits, okay? And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into the tar pits, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all of their provisions, so all their livestock and their wealth, and went their way. They also took, and here's the big problem, they took Lot, the son of Abraham's brother. And this is where God's people get involved, and they've been taken captive in war. And of course, Lot was dwelling where? In Sodom. Should the believer have moved to Sodom? Answer, No, he's a terrible dad. I mean, that would be the equivalent of having, teenage daughters today and say, hey, let's move to the Vegas Strip. I know you girls can find a job there. Terrible idea, horrible idea. And then it says that, and his possessions and went their way. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew. And interestingly enough, this is the first time that we ever read the word Hebrew in the Bible. He calls him Abram the Hebrew. The first time a word appears in the Bible, who was living by the oaks of Mamre. It's an ancient site. The Amorite brother of Iskol and Anar, and these are the allies of Abraham. And when Abraham heard that his kinsman, his relative, had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men born in his house. And here we read, how many assassins did he have? 318. Okay. And went in pursuit as far as Dan, and he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Habah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions. He also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possessions and the women and the people. Okay, so here's what's going on. You're either like, I get it, or I have no idea what's going on. So let me bring you up to speed. Genesis chapter 3, human sin begins, sin enters the world, and there's a curse. And ever since then, every generation is trying to figure out how to manage, work around, live under sin and the curse. And what we saw earlier in the book in Genesis chapter 4, we saw that Cain killed his brother Abel. And so conflict, it was between individuals, but here now it's escalating. It's now between armies. Okay. So you've got military forces, military campaigns, weaponry, strategy, wars, and conflicts. And things are getting worse. And the sin and the curse is causing escalation and military buildup. The other thing that we see here is that God knows what's going on geopolitically, and he cares and he pays attention. God says, here's the nations, here's the boundaries, here's the borders, here's their kings, here's their rulers, and here's the current geopolitical climate. And sometimes God's people will say, we really shouldn't pay attention to earthly things, just heavenly things. We shouldn't pay attention to politics and conflicts. Well, the issue with that is God does. And if God does, then God's people should as well. And now, to be sure, the kingdom of God should be our highest priority. But honestly, to be good citizens and to care about human life and flourishing, we need to pay attention what's going on politically, nationally, and internationally. And that's what's going on here. And it's sort of an international peek from God's perspective of what is an escalating series of regional conflicts. And this takes place with a number of nations. Now, two of which we know what they are. The other ones, there is some debate. So for sure, Shinar is what today we would call Iraq. In the ancient world, it was called Babylon. And then when it mentions Zalom today, that is what we know as Iran. The other nations were smaller. They were sort of these, feudal states that we know far less about. But true or false, we still have some conflicts existing around Iran and Iraq. Okay. And as we read this, we can put this into perspective that essentially these are the great, 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 great grandchildren of people today in these nations. And sometimes, us as Westerners and Canadians and Americans, sometimes we get a little cute, right? We're like, well, if we just go over and fly over there and talk to them, I'm sure that we can help and sort this out. That's not going to happen. These people have been fighting for a very long time, thousands of years of geopolitical conflict between this group. And it tends to go all the way back to the days of Abraham. And what happens, it's like, well, like what's going on here? I don't understand. Okay, it says that four kings invaded five kingdoms and overtook them. Okay. Another note is that this is the first invasion of a sovereign nation by another foreign nation and a foreign occupation of a nation in the entire history of the Bible. So what happens here is there are nine nations altogether. Okay. Four of them align and then they attack and invade the five. and then occupy the five for a total of 12 years. So 12 years of foreign occupation following a foreign invasion. I know I say this every week. Maybe you get tired of me saying this. But what's interesting is Genesis isn't just about what happened, it's about what always happens. And sometimes people say, you can't just teach through a book of the Bible. You need to pay attention to what's going on in the world and deal with all of the real issues in the world. And what I find is every single week, as we're going through a passage in the Bible, it's actually speaking to what's going on in the world. And it just works that way because God is over human history and his word is not old. It is eternal, it is timeless, therefore, it is always timely. And there's a lot going on in the world. And what we're seeing here is the invasion of a sovereign nation and occupation by foreign invaders. Okay. Does that sound like anything that you've heard in the news recently? I mean, initially, we probably think because all over the news, we're looking at what's happening in Iran. But I want to go back a couple of years and just sort of focus on the Russia and the Ukraine thing. Russia invading Ukraine and they're trying to occupy Ukraine. They are trying to be the ruler of what was a previously sovereign nation. They want to topple the government. They want to overtake the people and they want to claim all of the resources. And that is exactly what is happening here as we read in Genesis. So ultimately, this is kind of a case study for how we can interpret what's even happening in our own day geopolitically and what's dominating the headlines at this very moment. And so these four nations come together, and then the five nations, after 12 years of occupation and oppression, they rise up, and the citizens now are fighting back and revolting. They're seeking to take back their nation, to push the invaders back over their borders. And it's the same thing that we're seeing right now playing out in the news. And this sort of battle is not unlike if we go back even to World War II. You've got the Axis powers, you've got the Allied powers coming together, and ultimately Abraham is going to sort of be the Winston Churchill of this story. He's going to be the leader of the setting free of those who have been oppressed and invaded. And so part of the reason that Abraham, who we consider to be the father of faith, is activated is because of his relative Lot. Lot is taken as a prisoner of war, along with his household, all of his possessions, and also his wife and his daughters. But just think about that for a moment. Foreign invaders come, they invade, and then they enslave the women and the children. Okay. That is the most horrifying, unconscionable things that are probably going to be done to these people. And Lot cannot free his family. So before we get into the dynamics, let's talk a little bit about this man, Lot. He's going to show up a lot throughout the life of Abraham. He's a lot of problems. He has a lot of drama, a lot of issues, man. He's a situation, right? Now, my question to you, and I kind of touched on this last week. How many of you people know somebody like that? How many of you have a relative like that, right? It's like these people, they always have a crisis. They always have an emergency, right? And they're always making this cascading series of bad, foolish decisions, okay? And it is a lot of work to try to save them from themselves. That's Lot, okay? A bit about Lot. They were together, Abraham and Lot, and God said that he would bless Abraham and bless those who blessed him. And God fulfilled that. They were both so blessed. We looked previously in Genesis, they had so much wealth, so much land, so much livestock, so many members of employees, their extended household and servants, so much so that the land that they were in could not contain them, so they had to separate. And this is the point that we learned last week, and that is that you need to have boundaries with your own family. And so Abraham's like, okay, that's your land. This is my land. That's your business. This is my business. That's your family. This is my family. That's your livestock. This is my livestock. And he gets to the point, excuse me, and the ultimate lesson here is that, you can't have a healthy family unless you have healthy boundaries, okay? But what happens is Abraham does something that I think is foolish, something that is perhaps an act of faith, but he looks at Lot and says, okay, there's a piece of land here, there's a piece of land there. It's northern, it's southern, and he lets Lot choose what piece of land. He says, Lot, which one do you want? And I don't think he should have done that because Abraham, again, he's the leader. He's the anointed, chosen man of God. He's older and he is the actual source of the blessing. And what he tells Lot is just pick whatever land that you want and I'll take what's left over. And we know that Lot lived by sight, not by faith. And he notices that this one portion of land is greener. It's got more water, and it's in the desert. And, if you own a piece of land in the desert that's not brown and it's green and it has water, that is a rare miracle. And so he looks and he sees the green and he decides, I'm going to take that land. The problem is it's right next to a country or a nation or a people called Sodom. And these are not the people that you would want your kids to go to school with. These are naughty, nasty people. They are the most debased, depraved people in the entire Old Testament. And if you keep reading on, you know that God's going to send road tar out of heaven to them. It's not a blessing. And ultimately, so Lot moves his family there. He shouldn't be there. He should not be there. And what we see here is that he's now moved over the border and into Sodom. So when Sodom is invaded, his family is taken captive. And so ultimately, Sodom is a bad place to be. Lot is a bad leader. He is a bad head of a household. He's a bad husband and he's a bad father. And what happens is Abraham's going to need to deliver him. And what's really weird, if you keep reading the storyline, after he gets delivered, where does Lot go? Back to Sodom. How ridiculous is that? I mean, how many people have you seen? It's like you just got out of rehab and you went right to the bar. You didn't even take a day off. You just got out of a bad relationship with the crazy nut job boyfriend. He calls you and then you went back out with him. We tend to go back to really bad habits and patterns sometimes, and that's exactly what Lot does. Now, we can read this story and we can go, you know what, Lot's a foolish guy. Or we could read this and say, you know what, there's days that we all look a little bit like Lot, that we get out of trouble and then we immediately get back into it. But that being the case, remember this, Lot is a believer, but he's not a very courageous or active man in his faith. There's an epistle, a letter in the New Testament written by Peter, and he says that Lot is a believer. But here's what we don't see. We don't see him worshiping God. Abraham keeps building altars. I mean, he's that's literally planting a church back then. He has hundreds, maybe thousands of people in his household, and he's going to worship and he's going to lead his family and his household in worship. But we never see Lot build an altar. We never see him worship with his family, and we never see him taking his family to Abraham's church, which in that day would be Abraham's altar. He's a guy who does know the Lord, but we don't see him praying and seeking God's will. We don't see him worshiping or leading his family in the word of God. And oftentimes there are people like this, and we know them, and they do know the Lord, but they're just not actively pursuing or growing in their relationship and maturity with the Lord. And as a result, they do know the Lord, but they're not making the best decisions. And usually it's their family that ends up paying the high price for that. And the reason that Abraham and Lot have a relationship is ultimately Lot's dad died. And so Abraham is the closest living male relative, and he seems to have some kind of obligation that he senses towards Lot. He's like, hey, he doesn't have a dad. I'll be like the father figure in his life. But you need to know this is that the relationship between Abraham and Lot is one way. This is not a mutually beneficial relationship. This isn't a friendship. Abraham gives, Lot takes, and then Lot makes bad decisions, right? Abraham gets involved to clean up the mess that he's made. Lot moves his family to Sodom. It's taken as captive in war. And now Abraham's got to go deliver and liberate him. And here's the thing, you can only have a certain number of these type of relationships in your life. If you have a one-way relationship where you're always pouring out and these people are always taking, You can only have a certain sort of limited amount of those relationships. And oftentimes, we see in the dynamics here, the family system plays itself out. Oftentimes, you would not pick someone like this to be in a relationship. But if they're family, you kind of feel stuck with them, right? You're like, well, if I was picking friends, I wouldn't pick them. If I could go and choose who I'm going to do life with, I would not choose to do life with them, but they're family, so we're going to try and make it work. And this brings me to my next point. There are only three kinds of relationships, okay? There's healthy relationships, there's unhealthy relationships, and there are no relationships. Those are your options. And so with Lot, Abraham cannot have a healthy relationship because Lot's not a healthy person. If you're wise, it's easy to have a healthy relationship with you. Lot is not wise and he's not healthy, so you can't have a healthy relationship with him. So now Abraham's left with two choices. He can have an unhealthy relationship with Lot, or he can have no relationship with Lot. And when it comes to no relationship, you need to know that you should reserve that for people who are evil. They're dangerous, right? Now we look at Lot. Is Lot evil? Not really. He's just foolish. And he's not really hurting his family, but what he is doing is he is making dumb decisions that allow other people to hurt his family. And so what Abraham decides here is I can't have a healthy relationship. I'm not going to choose no relationship, so we're going to have an unhealthy relationship. And there is wise, foolish, and evil, and then healthy relationship, unhealthy relationship, and no relationship. And the truth is, though, when you understand all of that, you can only have a limited number of relationships with foolish people or these unhealthy relationships because they're very expensive. They take a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money. And I mean, imagine if Abraham was doing this for all of his relatives. I'm sure there were other foolish people. His whole life essentially would have been consumed with just caring for the needs of grown men and their families. But for whatever reason, he chooses to invest in Lot. And so what we see here is Abraham decides we're going to have an unhealthy relationship. Now, when you have an unhealthy relationship, you need boundaries and consequences. Now, he's already established the boundaries, and throughout the rest of the book, you're going to see the consequences. But what happens here is Lot's gotten himself into a position that he can't get himself out of. And it includes Abraham's other relatives. And this would kind of be like, let's say I'm an uncle, and this is my brother, and this is his wife, and these are my nieces and nephews, and oh my goodness, they've gotten taken prisoner of war. Am I going to be active or passive? Right? Now, what we saw previously is when it came to his wife, was Abraham active or passive? He was very passive. He's on the border of Egypt. He looks at his wife. He goes, "Baby, you look so good. You look so pretty. Love your shoes, love your nails, love your hair. Oh, by the way, I think when we get into Egypt, they're going to look at you and they're going to want you. So they're going to want to kill me. So what we're going to do, I'm just going to give you to them. You can marry the cult leader who runs Egypt. You're going to be his wife. I'll be all right. Don't worry about me." I mean, how many women said if their husband ever said that, they just want to stab them, right? And he gives his wife away because why? Because he doesn't like conflict and he doesn't want to have to be in this dangerous situation. And you would think that he would activate because it does say in the story that he gave his wife to Pharaoh and then he took Abraham's wife into his house. And how many of you guys, if you saw your wife going into another dude's house and you know it's not for a prayer meeting, that at that point you would be activated, right? But even then, he was passive. He wasn't activated. So what happens is God ends up having to deliver and save Sarah. But here, now that Lot is taken, Abraham is not going to be passive. He's going to be active. He's going to do something. He's going to be willing to have that conflict and risk his own life, the very thing he was unwilling to do for his wife. Now, this reaction, it may be him repenting or growing and saying, wow, I really blew it last time, but I'm going to get it right this time. I will say, though, and the Bible doesn't say anything about this had to have frustrated Sarah, right? She's like, you let me go, and now you're going to war with to go fetch your crazy relatives. It's like you still got some fight in you. Next time, fight for me. And he will get another opportunity for that as we go on into the book of Genesis. That's coming in the future. But here's the big idea. When it comes to faith, faith manifests itself in two ways. And Abraham is called the father of faith, okay? That means that the pattern, the precedent, the prototype of faith in the Bible. And faith is either active or it's passive, okay? Active faith and passive faith are really requiring that you and I know what the will of God is. There are times that God says, don't do anything. Don't say anything. I got this. Just pray, wait, trust me. I'm going to take care of it. This is not for you to do. This is for me to do. You just need to be passive and trust. Okay. Then there are other times when God shows up and says, you need to get up and go do something. You can't just sit there. You're part of the plan, you're part of the solution. And trust me, if you go, I will go with you and I'll work through you. And what happens is most people either have active or passive faith, right? So, how many of you are like passive faith people, right? You're like, okay, I'm pray, I'll fast, I trust the Lord, and I just wait for the Lord. That's passive faith. And and sometimes and then I ask the question, well, how many of you are more active, right? You're like, I don't know what we're doing, but we're going to do something, right? And that's what happens is that people will get stuck in a rut of either a passive faith or an active faith. They will not activate, and God does something amazing, and then they think, okay, this is how I have my relationship with God. I'm just passive. And then there are other times that they really need to be active. And then other people are like, well, God works through me and he shows up when I'm active. So every single time they just sort of rush into the battle. And that's not always the answer. Sometimes the battle is the Lord's and you need to wait for him to prevail. So the real key is knowing the will of God and knowing, is my faith requiring me to be passive or active right now? And so Abraham here is going to activate his faith. And so what we see here, he's called the Hebrew, and this is the first time that this word appears in the Bible. People say, well, what does Hebrew mean? Do you know what it means? It means outsider, the stranger, the oddball, the outlier. It would be a word to use similarly in the New Testament, where we use the word sort of holy. And it's like, it means this: you see, everybody does it this way, but you do it that way. You're the outsider, you're the oddball, you're the unique one, you're the holy one. So he's the Hebrew, and he's not going to think and act like everybody else, because at this point of the story, he thinks and acts on behalf of his God. And basically, here, what you see with Abraham, he's very successful, right? And again, we talked about this last week. We tend to think, sort of in all culture, that if you've got all of this land and employees and money and power, that that's a bad thing. But sometimes it's because God blessed them. And ultimately, here, God has blessed Abraham. So we learned previously he had a lot of land, he had a lot of livestock, and he must have had a large farm to feed all of his entire household. It said that he had gold and silver. And it says here he has 318 trained assassins. Okay. He's got his own Navy SEALs, he's got his own militia, he has his own trained soldiers, and it says that they were born in his household. You know what that means? It means that he raised them like a father. And what that means is that they are incredibly loyal to him. Well, how do we know that? Well, if you've got 318 Navy SEALs in your house, if they want to be in charge, they could be at any given moment. Okay. But if they still respect your authority, it's because you're a great leader and you treated them very well. And with this, we see a very important principle. If God is going to bless you, you need to defend it. And oftentimes we're like, I wish God would just bless me. And sometimes that's hard, because if God did bless you, the question is, would you be able to defend it? It's like marriage. Marriage is a blessing, right? But you've got to defend it. Children are a blessing, but you need to defend and protect them. Having a business is a blessing. You need to defend and protect that. A church, a ministry is a blessing, but you need to defend and protect it. Why? Because as soon as you have something, guaranteed, someone else wants to take it. So you need to be able to defend it. And so here's God's blessing, and then you're defending. So Abraham's empire is so significant. he has 318 full-time soldiers on the payroll. And these are guys that for them, this military combat is not, I sign up for 4 years and go on with my life. They're not in the reserves. This is their lifelong vocation. These are highly trained warriors and assassins, and all they do every day is prepare for war. And the big idea here is this: they're going to be small in number. Now, David had 400 mighty men, and then God whittled Gideon's army down to 300. Abraham only has 318, but it's not how many men are in the fight, it's how much fight is in the men. And ultimately, 318 guys that have spent their entire life drilling, practicing for battle, they've got weaponry, they've got strategy, they are going to be far more effective. Think of it as a sporting event. If you're talking about basketball and you have two teams, right? One team's got 5 people, one team's got 25 people. Okay. The problem is the 25 people, they've never played basketball, and the 5 people, they're all on the NBA All-Star list, right? These 5 guys are going to beat those 25 guys because they know what they're doing. They're prepared, they've done it before. And so ultimately, it's not about the number of people, but it's about the quality of people that are in the battle. And the key here is this: is that the key to every battle is this: it's logistics. You can have great soldiers, but if they don't have a clear path towards the point of battle, they don't have the right weaponry, they don't have the right strategy. If they don't understand the topography and the weather, you can't get supplies to soldiers, they're going to lose. So, really, if we truly understand, if you're a soldier, you know that battles are won in law off the battlefield and then they're executed on the battlefield. And what's really interesting here with Abraham is he shows up and then all of a sudden he becomes the logistical expert for this military campaign. He's the one who actually brings together the 5 kings, and he's going to be the leader of their armies and his. They all defer to him as the military strategist and expert. And this is going to be defending a nation and liberating oppressed people. And what he does, he attacks at night, we read. And the point is this: this is very important. Okay. Trust the Lord, but have a good plan. I mean, some of you are like, I just trust the Lord. Well, trust the Lord and have a good plan. Why does he attack at night? He's going to surprise the enemy. You can't attack what you can't see. And most of his opposition is probably asleep, right? And what we see here is that now Abraham is a warrior. He is willing to fight. And guess what? This will shock you. At this point of the story, he's 75 years old. It says that he rides over 100 miles into battle. I mean, can you imagine? I'm almost 60 and I think twice about getting up on a ladder, right? I don't want to get hurt. Getting older, it's hard, right? I mean, I sleep with the wrong pillow. I could throw it in my back. But here's a guy whose rides over 100 miles, takes over the military forces of 5 small kingdoms, and he rides into battle. And what's interesting is he pushes the invading, occupying forces over 100 miles. You know how strong you got to be to fight someone for 100 miles? It's like every day they're running and running and running. And then it's like, all right, we'll see you in the morning. We're not going to stop until you cross over the border and you vacate these sovereign nations. We are going to bring the fight to you. And so he drives them over 100 miles. And it says that they fall into tar pits. Now, you could read that and be like, man, those are the dumbest soldiers ever. No, you don't really, nobody's looking at a tar pit and saying, let's jump in and see what happens. What happens is you're driven into a tar pit. It means that Abraham understands topography and he's like, okay, when you push those troops towards that region and we're going to encircle them. And they got two choices: they're going to die or they're going to jump in that tar pit. And so what he is doing, he is strategically driving all of his enemies towards death. And it's going to say in Hebrews that he slaughtered them, that he slaughtered them. And so to point out the obvious, Abraham, true or false, at this point, he is not a pacifist. You know what he is? He's a pass the fist. Okay. That's a huge character change from the last time when he kind of ran away from conflict. That's more of what Abraham is like. And a lot of times people read the Bible and even Christians, and they'll be like, I don't think God's people should engage in conflict and war. Okay, good luck with that, right? If someone shows up at your house and wants to hurt you, what are you going to do? Even if you think that way, you're going to call someone who's not a pacifist, right? And why is this important? Listen, evil never stops itself. Evil needs to be stopped. Evil never stops itself. It needs to be stopped. And that is why Abraham is active. That's why we believe in law. That's why we believe in law enforcement and police officers. That's why we believe in soldiers and borders. And because we believe the Bible, which tells us that sin and the curse is real, and evil won't stop itself. And those who don't believe the Bible and think that we're basically and essentially good, and they'll act like we don't need borders, we don't need soldiers, we don't need police officers. Let's defund the police, right? Let's see what happens. And parts of the country did that. They did a little experiment, and what happened? It literally became hell on earth. Everybody's getting shot, everything's getting set on fire, businesses were ruining, cities are emptying. And that was really the only first couple of days of that experiment. Now imagine applying that for generations, and there's not going to be anybody left because evil doesn't stop itself and it needs to be stopped. And so ultimately, what we see in the example of Abraham, and I would say this as well, our God is not a pacifist. Okay. We just saw that when earlier in Genesis, God saw everyone was evil all the time. What did he do? He flooded the earth. He killed everyone except for 8 people. God said, they're not going to stop. I'm going to stop them. So again, this is a case study for what we're seeing right now. Now, I tend not to talk about political issues or political candidates, and because I truly believe that God's people should not go left, they shouldn't go right, they should only go up and say, okay, God, what do you say? What is your kingdom like? What does your word say? And then apply that to the situation. So that's what we're doing here. We're going up and we're looking at this case study in Genesis 14 of an invasion and then the liberating and of oppressed people. And so ultimately, we're seeing this play out right now in multiple places around the world. But let's look at Russia and the Ukraine. And when we talk about this, it raises the question of something that's called a just war. Okay. Some people will, and you can, when after I tell you about these causations for just war, when you see a conflict that's giving you trouble, the subject it to this criteria and say, is this a just or is this not just? So some people will wrongly translate the Ten Commandments into thou shalt not kill. It doesn't say that. Thou shalt not murder is what it says. And there's a big difference between murder, which is the taking of an innocent life, and killing and defending someone from someone who wants to take an innocent life. So let me just explain this. This is something called just war. It's something that philosophers, Christian theologians, ethicists, and others have postulated, and it's predicated on 7 factors, 7 things. Okay. Number one, these are questions that need to be asked. Number one, is the person in the campaign a legitimate authority? Okay. So in this case, when we look at Abraham here, the 5 kings and kingdoms that were invaded and overtaken, are they a legitimate authority? Yes, they're sovereign nations and they're the leaders of their government and they've been invaded. So they have the right to fight back. Does Abraham have legitimate authority to go to battle to liberate his family? Yeah. You know what? Somebody takes your family hostage, feel free to get involved. Okay. I would be the first involved. Second thing, is the act defensive, not offensive? Okay. So offensive would be those nations that actually invaded those sovereign nations. Defensive is the sovereign nations defending their sovereignty and seeking to expel their opponents. So this is a defensive, not a offensive modality. In addition, is the cause noble? Is it a noble cause? Is what Abraham is leading a noble cause? Yeah. 4 nations invade 5, enslave their people for 12 years. They've taken everybody's private property. They've taken their women and their children. And so it is a noble cause to go and set the captives free. And Abraham is doing this as a man. Is it noble for a man to put himself in harm's way to protect and defend women and children? Yes, it is. And I know that sounds crazy because it almost sounds like I believe that there's a difference and I believe that there's male and females. I do, okay? And I believe that men should use their strength to defend, to love, protect, and serve women and children. And if you don't, and there's a lot of guys in this new culture that's come about, they're like, I don't believe in masculinity. Like that's bad. It's a sin. You need to repent of that. Ultimately, it tells us in First Corinthians 16, it says, act like men. And you know what? There's two things that you can take out of that. You know what that is? There are men and they should act like it. Okay. So when the bad guys show up to hurt the women and children, the good guys show up to protect the women and the children. That's a noble cause. And if you can't understand that, I can't help you. Okay, number four. The fourth question is it proportional force? So this is where dictators, thugs, crazy, demon-possessed cult leaders like we see in North Korea, this is why they want nuclear weapons because they want to always threaten disproportional force. So it's like, well, if you show up and you shoot a bullet, we're going to shoot a nuke. Okay. That's not proportional force. Okay. So here, does Abraham use, and those aligned with him, do they use proportional force? Yeah. They've got bows and arrows and they're fighting hand to hand combat. This is proportional force. Okay. Question number five. Are civilians targeted or just soldiers? Is Abraham here targeting civilians? Absolutely not. He's only targeting soldiers. But when we look at the invading soldiers, they targeted civilians. They took Lot and his family. And so the question is, are you going to remove the soldiers so that the civilians can have freedom? Or are you attacking the civilians so that you can oppress them? Number six, does it preserve more life than it takes? And the answer here is yes. We're going to lose some soldiers in this battle, but we're going to liberate five kingdoms. So ultimately, if it's some soldiers for five kingdoms, and if these kingdoms rule, or sorry, the four kingdoms that are ruling over, if the four kingdoms ruling over the five, if this continues for generations and generations, now we're looking at generations of human suffering. So to remove them today, so that there's no oppression tomorrow, that is in fact preserving more life than it takes. And then the seventh causation for just war is it a last resort? Have you tried everything else? And the answer here in this case is yes. It's been 12 years and they're not leaving. It's not getting any better. So, based upon this, what's happening right now, if we look at sort of the Russia and the Ukraine thing, um, it's not it's not a just war. From Russia's perspective, it was unprovoked. They're targeting civilians. It's disproportional force by an army that has far more technological capabilities. It's unjust. And I don't really care where you are on the sort of political spectrum. At the end of the day, when these people invade and they bomb these people, that's sort of wrong. And then these people have the right to push back, and both sides are fighting. One side is just, the other is unjust. And I'm not saying one side here is perfect and the other side is not. But what I am saying is that one side has the right to defend itself, and the other does not have the right to oppress the other. And that's really the lesson that we're sort of learning. I'm going to stop right here. That's the lesson that we're learning in this particular passage of scripture. And as we look at sort of some of the things that are going on, we talked about Russia, the Ukraine. If we apply those principles, it's pretty obvious on sort of who is sort of justified in doing what and who's not. And other conflicts, whether it's in the Middle East or whether it's what's going on in Iran, when we apply these principles, these causations of war that are really taught to us, they're demonstrated here in Genesis. It really teaches us about the fact that number one, there is a time and a place where believers are to be engaged in war, are to protect people, and then but there's sort of rules and principles that have to fall within. So when we look at conflicts, when you apply these principles and you look at the story in Genesis to see does this fit, and if it does fit, who's sort of justified and who's sort of unjustified. All right, I've babbled on for enough time so far. Any comments about what we've talked about today? Criticisms? Open up the floor for talk. And don't everyone speak at once. Again, that's so rude.
Now I understand where you were coming from on Tuesday.
Well, there you go, right?
Rob, I have to leave early, so I might as well state my opinion. But you see a lot in social media and the news that Pope Leo was condemning Trump for getting engaged in war, and he said no Christian leader can be respected who supports, starts, or propagates a war. And that is totally not true, just based on what you said. So, the ultra liberal mindset is the greatest enemy to values, I believe. I mean, it's good to be liberal and understanding and loving and kind. But when you become weak, and look, nobody likes war. Anyone that's been in war, all right, there are certain people that love it and want to go back. And I used to be that guy. But after a while, you get tired of it, it burns you out. But when it's necessary, you got to do it. Like you said, evil will not stop itself. Evil has to be stopped by an outside force, whether that's a police officer, whether it's a soldier, doesn't matter. So when evil presents its ugly head, it needs to be chopped off, and somebody's got to grab the sword to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But it does. It really, yes, we don't look for war, but to adopt the mindset, and it's not just within what the Pope is saying. There are many believers in the evangelicals that just have this pacifist thing. It's like, oh, listen, that's you would not be in church worshiping God if people before you hadn't have stood up, risked their life. Many gave their life to guarantee the freedoms that allowed you to do what you're doing now. The problem is that we look at our educational system, we look at the narrative of social in music and TV and everything else, and what it's demasculizing men. It's essentially saying you're a terrible person if you, number one, even identify the fact that there's a difference between a man and a woman, but if you sort of portray these masculine toxic traits of aggression and things of that nature. Listen, men are toxic in aggression to protect women and children. That's the way that we were designed. It's true in humans, it's true in the animal kingdom, right? But that's the big danger. And I can't even imagine, like imagine there was a global conflict now where the entire that sort of demographic of between 18 and say 25 was conscripted into the army. We would be in serious trouble, man. They wouldn't make it out of basic training. Now that's scary. But there's a time and a place. There's a season for peace, a season for war. But the key is making sure that what you are doing is aligning with the principles of what God has set out. And right here, there's a very good example of the principles of what is sort of consensual, or what is in line with God's principles in getting into sort of conflict here. And if you're following God's principles and God's on your side, that's where all of these leaders really miss the mark, because if God's before you, who can be against you, right?
Yeah, I understand that. Uh, as Joe was talking, I was sitting there saying, yeah, I agree. I understand what he's saying about it. But when he was threatening to annex Canada or Greenland, that was pushing the limit.
Right.
Again, we don't look
But
to the
that's
left, we don't look to
geopolitical.
the right, we just look up, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, you brought up the Russia-Ukraine war. To me, I've always paid attention to politics and history. To me, it was just like Putin wants the former Warsaw Pact back.
For
And
sure.
and right now, even within NATO, we're fighting amongst ourselves. But we overall, I do agree with Robert. We have to look at it and look up there to find out and get our answers, but also not be afraid of the war, it's so to speak.
And it's juggling because while we're doing that, we're juggling our active faith and our passive faith while we're still looking for the will of God. I get that's a full-time job, right? Just existing regardless of what your occupation is. That's a full-time job. It can take a lot of energy, a lot of discipline. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, like I said, it takes a lot of effort to try to do I do this or do I do that? But you always have to ask for questions and look for answers. Like I was asked when I was in Mexico, I missed the cartel incident by 1 week. And I was asked what I would have done. I would have done what I was trained to do, protect my family and my friends. But that's who I am. Another person, well, you can't do that. And that's the younger generation. But it was interesting that you said about how they're making men unmasculine. Statistically, I heard a weird statistics. 22% of men nowadays will not approach a woman because they're afraid of what will happen.
It is the textbook. You go back to the book of Daniel. When you look at Daniel, when they took them over, one of the first things they did to the men, they castrated them, right? They castrated them, take away their testosterone, take away their ability to reproduce. But essentially, they're not being physical. Well, some of them are being physically castrated when we look at some of these gender issues. But what we are doing is that we are psychologically castrating men. We are saying that if you even have you give off the aura that you have these masculine traits or things of that nature, that you're being ostracized, and we have three brains in our body. We have our brain, we have our heart brain, we have our gut brain, and they all sort of interact, and they are they were the way God designed us to be able to survive. And when we start to mess around with that, this is why you see like the terror. And yeah, I can't and you know what? If you want to be like that, hey, go you be you, okay? Don't get married, don't have kids, because your wife and your kids, they don't deserve the fact that you're not going to be able to protect them, right? That is what a man's job is to do, is to protect his wife, is to protect his children. You can't, it's interesting that like a marriage license is the only license you could get that you don't have to write a test for, right? You should almost have to write a test. You should have like a duel, right? Okay, what's your level of fighting? Yeah, but no, that's a very good point.
But like I said, now I'm getting more understanding about different things.
Right.
And I'm starting to put it into areas like that.
Yay. There's a whole book. We're only in Genesis, man. Just think of what we're going to be done when we get through this.
Oh, it's just like the coward and showing courage.
Right.
I show courage and be a warrior. They don't like it. They want me to be passive and you don't better not do that. These are the consequences for your actions. And to me, that's the one thing that I find that is opening up my mind and how we're op expanding our knowledge and our faith and our some people call it self-confidence, some people will call it arrogance. It depends on which side of the line you're
The
looking at.
thing is, too, is I mean, you can read this passage and apply these same principles to civilians, right? But when you
Hmm.
look at military people and you look at those that come from a law enforcement background, okay, like let's face it, nobody likes to say this. What is a soldier's job? A soldier is trained highly to, when called upon, go and kill someone. They're not in the public relate. That's what a soldier's job is, right? What is a police officer's job? They're to respond, protection of lives and property, and resolve conflict, right? And
Mhm.
so when there is force being used, like I look in the law enforcement perspective, when there's force being used, it's just natural for someone that comes from that. They want to be that person that protects the person, protects the victim, that either matches or eliminates that sort of force. And those are hard things to sort of to turn off, right? Very hard things to turn off.
Mhm.
Um, but there is the Bible tells us there's a time and there's a place for it. And the
Mhm.
key to knowing when the time is and when the place is to understand what God's will is. And in order to understand what God's will is, that we got to be tuning into the right station that we're listening to, right? I know my mom's been trying to say something here. Go ahead. I
I'm,
know that lean forward. That means you're about to speak.
no, it's raining and it's noisy in here. Um, Evil never stops itself, but needs to be stopped. I totally get that. And I like the thought of the 7 questions that you put there about war, too. But I'm going to go back to the very beginning before you started, but I really enjoyed today. Talking about the music that you played, because
Right.
I went on early so that I wouldn't mess up, because I often have trouble. I'm not a techie person, as you know. So I went on early, and of course, there was that music, which isn't my style. I listened to the words, and like, we are the living stones. We give the glory to you alone. Um, Let all creation sing. I wrote down the words, and some of it was repetitive. It was excellent. Every idol has to come crashing down, and all the honor belongs to you forever and ever. Straight scripture. So I have to. I'm. That's not my style of music.
I'll mix it up. Don't worry. It's
No,
just
no,
it's
no,
so
no, 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 no. It was excellent as I stopped and I listened. You just can't, hex on things that you don't isn't your first choice. But
right.
it was the words were excellent, Rob. Really, no, but it was good. And Genesis isn't just about what happened then; it's what's happening all the time. So it's a good
Each and every
reminder.
day.
Yeah.
Each and every day.
Yeah.
Diego, welcome, my friend. Great to have you back. How are you doing this week?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm glad to be back. I know I missed I would say 2 from the first one that I joined in.
Right.
So it was finally that now I told you that I was gonna schedule my like these sessions here on my phone so that I remembered. So yeah, it was great. I appreciate you putting this together and this 25th session. It was great.
25. Can you imagine that, right?
Yeah, and actually, what you were talking about, the 318 soldiers, and like, it's just more of you're talking more about the quality. There's sorry, the quantity and quality. So there's more quality than quantity, right?
Right.
I was thinking about like the movie 300. So it's kind of similar to that, where um, I don't know if you've seen the movie 300, but it's like
I seen it a long time ago, but
yeah, it's
but I
just like.
understand the con.
I think I saw it like a couple months ago, and yeah, I'm pretty late to the party. But there's like so many armies coming in. They're just like coming in, but they just could not. They couldn't take them down. Like it was just well, eventually they did, but like there's like thousands of armies just coming in, and it was just 300 people. So I just thought what you were talking about was that's what it reminded me of.
Awesome.
Don't worry, I read the book.
Ah,
The Spartans, the Greek
yeah,
mythology.
Spartans.
Christopher, how's your day going today?
Good, thank you, Rob. Just
It looks like
battling a
you
migraine
just ascended into the mountains.
into the heavens. Um, Fighting a migraine, but I have one question for you, Rob, that
Sure.
may be on the minds of our listeners and people that might be watching our 25th service on YouTube. And that is, what role do you think God is playing currently, if any, in the conflicts that are going on right now in the world?
Hmm. I always say, I had this conversation, I think, with my mom not too long ago. It's like we talk about free will, right? But also predestination. And it's like God knows how it's going to end up. That's already been determined. but he gives humans a lot of free will, what road it's going to take to get there. He's already decided it's going to be this. And you know what? We can get to this in a good way. We can get to this sort of in a bad way. The fact of the matter is that like evil is at work. I believe there are likely more evil people worshiping false gods than there are God's chosen people on this planet. And, as we talked about earlier, can demons answer the prayers of people that are worshiping? Some of them can. And I just think, and this should not come to a surprise. I mean, we started at Genesis, we jumped to Revelation. It's laying this all out for us exactly what's going to happen. I heard Russell Brand read a passage of Daniel describing the kings and leaders in the old days. And I don't want to say who this fit to a T, but let's just say it's a very prominent leader in our world right now. And it describes the personality. It describes that they become sort of like their own God and they kind of discount these things, right? So it's just life. It is the fulfillment of what God has told us. And sometimes when we say, well, how could God allow something so bad to happen? Because God has already told us and prophesied that it's going to happen. And so it's allowing that prophecy working towards the end, at which point Jesus will come and knock it out, and that's when life begins, right? But it is a very hard question. Good things, bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people. It's confusion, right? But it should not come to any big surprise that we look at what's going on in the middle. This is the world's oldest conflict, right? This is the first conflict, we first recorded conflict in the Bible of nations. It's still going on all of these years later. And interestingly enough, I can't remember where I heard this, but I'm like, even in Iran, the largest majority of religion in Iran as it sits now, I understand, is not Muslim, it's Christian, but the leadership of the country is Muslim. So again, it's the world's oldest conflict. It's never going to be solved in this lifetime.
Unfortunately, you're right. But I liked how you brought Revelations in because that's what my friend Ron and I were talking about, and the seven seals.
Yeah, numbers are fascinating. Like sometimes when we read them, we don't really truly understand, but there are some themes with specific numbers that go throughout the entire scriptures, and there is meaning. There is meaning to them. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. For those people that are watching this on YouTube, please hit the like and the subscribe button. And to all of us, we'll see everybody here back next Saturday for episode 26. Same bat time, same bat channel. I hope everybody has a blessed week. And thank you for giving